Hi, this is Eric from DevOpsTechBlog.com. In this demo, we're going to be creating a RDS database instance, and we're going to create a MySQL database. So we're going to be using a MySQL engine on that database instance, and we'll also create a table inside that database and create some users, and we'll do some MySQL administration, and let's get started. The first thing we want to do is right now I'm at my AWS Management Console, so I'm going to search for RDS. Now we are in the RDS dashboard. So we have a resources section. Right now there's no instances. So towards the bottom here, I'm going to click on Create Database. And you could create it using Standard Create or Easy Create. We'll stick with Standard Create. And we have engine options. So the first one is Amazon Aurora. That's a MySQL or a SQL database similar to MySQL, but it is used for high performance databases. So if you press on info here and you look to the side, you'll see it's up to 5 times the throughput of MySQL, and it uses an SSD for storage, and it creates up to 15 read replicas. So if you have for example, a production environment and you need something high performance, you'll probably want to use Aurora, and that's only available in AWS. We have the option of MySQL and some other database engines. We're going to use MySQL, so go ahead and click on that. And we'll stick with the current version here, 5.7. We have an option of choosing a sample template. So you could choose between a production, a dev and test, and a free tier. Since this is just a demo, let's go ahead and use free tier. Let's give our instance a name. So we could go ahead and we'll call it customer DB1. We have an option for credential settings. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this to connect with this user name to our database. So go ahead, whatever you put here, I'm just going to keep it admin, but you'll need to remember this name because that's what we're going to use to connect to our MySQL database. So go ahead and create a password as well. So that password, very important. Make sure you write that down or just remember that password. We'll need that when we connect to our database. We have the option of a DB instance size. So since this is free tier, we're only allowed this one burstable class. It's a DB-T2 micro, but that's good enough for this demo. We have storage types. We have option between general purpose and provisioned IOPS. So you can see here to the side, it explains to us the difference. So with a general purpose, it bursts to 3,000 IOPS, whereas a provisioned IOPS SSD ranges from 1,000 to 30,000. So that's also good for high performance databases with a lot of input and output. And we have an option of allocated storage. The higher the allocated storage, the better the performance. We have an option to create storage auto scaling. It looks like it's enabled by default. So this provides dynamic scaling support for your databases, storage based on your application's needs. We'll keep that enabled. We have maximum storage threshold, so we'll keep that at 1,000. If we weren't using the free tier, we would have the option of using a multi-AZ deployment. So what that would do is create databases in other availability zones. That way, if something were to happen to our database, it would automatically fail over to another availability zone. For example, if the current availability zone that we're working in went down, maybe the data center was having a problem, we would have a replica in another availability zone, and that would allow us to continue using that database. So that's good for high availability. And here we have a option to create a new VPC that our database instance is going to be inside of. Let's see, we can use a default VPC or create a new one. Let's go ahead and create a new VPC. So just keep in mind, after your database is created, we will not have the ability to change the VPC. We have an option to use either password authentication or IAM password and IAM database authentication. So I just clicked on info. If you use it with IAM, it will create a better authentication feature and allow you to do centralized authentication management. So if you need something really secure, that might be a better option for you. Let's go ahead and use regular password authentication. We have more database options here. Here you can see we have a backup retention period. The default is 7 days, but you could lower it to as many as 0 days, so you won't have any retention of backups. And these are automatic backups, so you won't even have to worry about backing up your database, and it has a maximum of 35 days. So this right now will keep our database, a backup of our database for 7 days. You could choose a backup window. You could enable enhanced monitoring for your database, log exports. These will be published to Amazon CloudWatch. This right here, this maintenance section, it will enable auto minor version upgrades. So if there's any new features to the database that we're using, this will automatically update to those new features. We could select a maintenance window if we need to do any work on our database. So that way we can specify the downtime in case we need to let others know that our database is not going to be in production. We can enable deletion protection, so this will protect our database from accidentally being deleted. Here we get a printout of our estimated monthly costs. We're using the free tier. So let's go ahead and click on Create Database. Okay, you can see here that the status is the database is being created. So that's good. I want to go over here to Services and go to VPC. I just want to see the new VPC that our database instance created. When we were going through the options, we chose Create New VPC, and this is the VPC that our database is going to be in. So I had a default one, which here, if you look under Default VPC, that's the one that is the default. That's not the one that has the database instance. So I'm going to click on this one that says no. And this one I'm just going to click on this icon here with the pencil, and I'm just going to put DB instance so that way I'll know that this is the VPC that we are going to be using. So here you can see it gave us a CIDR here. Now what I want to do is click on subnets. So we can see that our VPC ID is here, and click on subnets. And these here correspond to our VPC. So there were subnets also created for our VPC automatically. In order to create an RDS DB instance, there is a minimum of 2 subnets that you must have in your VPC. So keep that in mind. We have a route table. This is our route table. I'm just going to put that's our database route table there. I'm going to click on Internet Gateway. So we have a Internet Gateway automatically created, and you can see down here it's attached to our VPC. I'm also going to mark that. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to go to EC2. So I'm going to click on EC2 here under Services. And I want to launch an instance, and we're going to use this instance as a jump box to connect to our database instance. So in the free tier, I'm going to use this first one in AMI, Amazon Linux 2 AMI. Select that. Click on Next. So we're going to, under Network, we want to click on the one we tagged DB instance, because that is the network that our DB instance is on. We could leave the subnet. Make sure that auto-assign public IP is enabled. That way we'll be able to connect to the EC2 instance from the internet. Everything else looks fine. We could review and launch. And I'm using a Windows machine, so depending on if you're using a Linux, a Mac, or a Windows machine, this process might be different. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create a new key pair. I'm going to name it DBKP, download it, and make sure you save it in a safe spot. So for Windows, it saves it as a PEM file, but we're going to need to change that, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. So go ahead and save it, and click on Launch Instances. You could click on View Instances to see the process of it being created. It's pending right now. So while that's going on, I'm going to use a program called Putty. And this one is called Putty Key Generator. So very important, if you don't have that, and make sure you install that. We're going to click on Load. And we have to look for our key pair. So go ahead and click on All Files. This is the one I named it, dbkp1.pm. So we're going to load that PEM file by pressing Open. And then you get a message here, successfully imported foreign key. Go ahead and click on OK. Next, we're going to click on Save Private Key and click on Yes. And what we're going to do is put the same exact name, but we're going to leave off this PEM extension. So make sure you leave that off because it's going to save it as a .ppk file. So go ahead and click on Save. Once that's done, you can close the key generator, and then we'll also need a program called Putty. So that generated the key. Now we could actually use Putty to log into our session. But first, what we have to do is click on this SSH section and expand it, and then click on Auth. We're going to browse for the key, that PPK file that we created. We're going to use that and click Open, and go back to Session, and make sure you copy the public IP of your EC2 instance, and it should be ec2-user at, and whatever that IP address is, and click Open. So we'll get this message here, a PuTTY security alert. You could just click on Yes, and you should get this screen here, and now we're logged into our EC2 instance. Okay, once our EC2 instance is created, we're going to use that as a jump box to connect to our MySQL database instance. So let's go ahead and go back to RDS. Click on DB instances, and we could click on customer DB1. Okay, we have a summary here with the CPU info. We have info about the availability, so our DB instance is now available. We're able to connect to it. It tells us the class, the region, and availability zone, so US East 1F. Connectivity and security monitoring. We have graphs of resource options here that we could see. CPU utilization, read-write, IOPS, and we have other tabs here to get more information about our database instance. Here under connectivity and security, we have an endpoint and port. So 3306 is the common port for MySQL. And we have the endpoint. So this is very important. Make sure that you copy this endpoint. We're going to use that to connect to our database. Here we have our VPC security groups. So this is the security group for our DB instance. And I'm going to open up a new tab with our EC2 dashboard. And I want to look at the security group for our EC2 instance here. So it's in Launch Wizard 2, which does not look like the same security group. So I want to take this security group here, SG-086, and under RDS security, our security group for our RDS instance, let's click on Actions and Edit Inbound Rules. Let's add a rule, and we can use MySQL. You can see the port range is 3306. That's the port we're going to be using. Here is the Launch Wizard 2 security group that our EC2 instance is in. So let's click on that. And what this is going to allow us to do is use our security group as a source to connect. So click on Save Rules. Now let's go back to our RDS. remember we need this endpoint, so copy that endpoint. And in our EC2 instance, we have to first make sure MySQL is installed. So let's do a yum install MySQL, and this is just an easy way of giving us the MySQL client, which is what we need in order to connect to our database. Let's also do sudo yum install MySQL. Okay, so it says MariaDB installed, that's fine. Now, in order to connect to our database, we're going to use the MySQL command. And remember the username that we use. Remember I kept it at admin. So we use -u and then your username and then -h for the host name. So that's where we put our endpoint name. So you could copy that there. So that's your endpoint name. And we could use a -p for password. And put in that password you specified when you created your DB instance. Once you press enter, it automatically connects using the port 3306, so we didn't have to specify the port. Otherwise, we would have to do a -p and then the port number when we connected with the MySQL command. So now we are connected to our database instance. Let's go ahead and start working with our database. So what we're going to do first is we're going to create a database, and the way to do that is to use the create command, and then database, and then the name of our database. So we're going to use customer DB and put a semicolon at the end. If we did that correctly, we'll get a message saying query OK, one row affected. Let's do a show databases. And this will give us a list of databases. You can see our customer DB in there. We can go into that database by using use customer DB. And we changed into that database. Next, we can create a table in that database. So let's do create table. We'll name it customers. And we'll specify the columns we want to put there. And the first one will be ID. And it's going to be an integer. And I'm going to specify not null. That means there has to be a value in each row. And we'll specify that we want it to auto increment. So we don't have to specify an ID number every time we enter a customer. It'll do it automatically. And then we need a comma. The next column is going to be first name. And it's going to be a varchar. And I'm going to specify 20 characters. Same thing with last name. And finally, the order number. And that's going to be an integer. And let's specify that we only want it to be 2 numbers. So after that, we're going to specify that the ID is going to be the primary key. So at the end here, we're going to type in primary key. And in parentheses, we're going to put ID. And close the parentheses and put a semicolon. Okay, let's go ahead and press enter. So we got a query OK. Now we could go ahead and start entering customers into our table. So we'll do an insert into the name of the table, which is customers. Now we have to specify the columns. So the first one is first name, and keep in mind we're leaving out the ID because that's going to auto increment. So let's put in the next column, which is last name and order number. Then we have to specify the values. So go ahead and enter the name values, open parentheses. Let's have our first customer, Mike, which is the first name. And these are in quotes. Smith is the last name. And his order number is going to be 35. So close those parentheses and put a comma. Let's do Maria. And her last name is Lopez. Her order number is 72. And finally, we have Robert. And his last name is Johnson. And he has an order number of 23. Put a semicolon at the end and press enter. So now we have 3 rows affected. And let's go ahead and select everything in our table and see what we got in there. So let's do a select and put an asterisk for all. And then we have to specify from and then the name of our table, customers. So you can see here that we have a table, and you can see the ID automatically incremented. So it has ID 1, 2, and 3 with the names of our customers and their order number. Okay, so that's how you create a table and insert rows into that table. We could also create users in MySQL. So let's do create user, and this is going to be, the user's name is going to be Tina. And then in order to give her a password, we have to specify identified by, and then the password we want to give her. So let's give her a super secret password here. So create user Tina identified by password. Okay, so that's good. We got query OK. Now, let's say you want to grant that user permissions. So we could grant specific permissions so they don't have all privileges inside the table. So let's do a grant, and we're going to grant that user insert so she could insert information in. Let's do select so she could query the table and also update information in the table. So those are her 3 permissions: on customer db.customers, to, in quotes, Tina, close the quotes, put an @ symbol, then in quotes localhost, semicolon. So you could see here we granted her those permissions. Now in order for those permissions to take effect, we could do flush privileges, and that will give her those permissions. And those are just some simple MySQL commands and things you could do with MySQL. There's a lot more you could do with MySQL, but we don't have the time to do that in this video. And I thank you for watching.